I'm Kenneth Victory, and today I have with me Paul Johns, and we have a story to tell about Smyrna. Paul, you said you moved to Smyrna in 1957 from the Jefferson Spring, Lamar area. Do you recall where you moved to your first house?
Yeah, I bought the first house that Uncle Frank built in Green Acre subdivision on Fairview Avenue, 406 Fairview.
That was up behind the Sonic, the Goodall Clinic area, is that
right,
correct?
That's exactly right.
1957, do you recall about how much that house cost you?
Yes, it was a 2-bedroom brick with a bathroom, a dining room, living room, and a kitchen and a carport brick. I paid $7,500 for it.
$7,500. Is the house still standing today?
Still standing today.
Still standing today. All right, you came to Smyrna after school. Where did you go to school?
I went to school at Old Jefferson for 8 years, and then we left Old Jefferson and come to Smyrna because Smyrna is the only place that had a high school in this end of the county. And there was a lot of schools around that went 1 through 8. Seminary 1 through 8, Laverne was 1 through 8, Rockdale was 1 through 8, and so all of us come into Smyrna when we got through with the 8th grade.
So you attended high school at Smyrna High School.
Smyrna High School.
Was Smyrna High School 1 through 12 at that time?
1 through 12. It was a rock school where the library sits today.
About how many students, do you recall?
I'd say somewhere between 275 and 300 students for the 12 grades.
12 grade. Today, a graduating class, I assume, must be 400 or 500.
It is, yes, it is.
Do you recall who your principal was?
Mr. McWilliams.
And you could, knowing you could probably name some of your teachers that you had back.
I can. Miss Sanford, Miss Brandon. You know Miss Brandon?
Yes.
Miss Alsop.
Yes.
Mr. John Buckner, and Mr. Buckner is the only one that I know of that's still living.
Still living. How many was in your graduating class?
37.
37.
And we've lost 9 out of the 37 in 57 years.
57 years. All right, and I believe that you met your wife while you was at the high school?
At the high school, we graduated together, yes we did.
And you're getting ready to celebrate how many years?
We just finished up the 27th day of December, 56 years.
56 years. Well, congratulations to Joy for putting up with you for 56 years, Paul.
She's got to take the responsibility, right?
Yeah. What type of work did you do after you got out of high school?
Well, of course, I was raised on a farm, and we farmed a lot of farms in Rutherford County and around Smyrna area, and had the opportunity to open up the Esso station where Larry Lee run for years in March of 1956, and then we sold that to Dick Johns. In 1959. We opened up the Phillips 66 station down on Moore Avenue where the PB station is today. And then I got an opportunity after that, and I was up at Nick's Drugstore. You know where that was?
Yes, yes.
Drinking coffee one morning, and Mr. Johnny Braswell come in and asked me, he said, "Paul, would you ever like to go to work for the post office again?" I said, "Yes, I would." And he said, "Come over in the morning, and I'm going to set you up to go to Nashville and take a test, and I'm going to give you your job." I worked at the post office up here next to Joe B's in that bank building. That was Miss Sarah Stallings was a postmistress, and I worked there for about half a year before we opened up the service station. And we got the opportunity to open up a service station, and I quit the post office and went to work there, and then went back, and I put in 42 and a half years with the post office.
All right. After the post office was next to Joe B's, where was the next post office that you worked?
It was where the pawn shop is today, right there in the roundabout, and that was opened up in May of 1957, and Mr. Braswell was the postmistress, and Miss Sarah Stallings was a postmistress up at the other post office. And then in 1984, we moved up to the new post office on Mayfield Drive, where it is today.
Yes. How many routes did we have back then, Paul, for the post office?
We had two city routes and 1 rural route, and Red Berry carried the 2 rural routes, And Don Reese carried City Route 1, which was here in the city, and I carried the Rural Route 2, which was base housing.
About how many houses did you have on your route? Do you recall?
It was all of base housing. I don't know exactly how many, somewhere around 400.
And I assume you walked that.
We walked that part, we sure did.
Did Don walk also?
Yeah, Don walked also.
But Mr. Berry, he had the rural route, so he drove.
He drove, he sure did, yeah.
And then later on, you moved on up to another part of town carrying the mail.
Yeah, I ended up in Meadowbrook, and I carried the Meadowbrook subdivision for 37 years.
About how many houses did you have there?
Oh, goodness, I don't know. I'd say close to 500.
500, so times have changed.
Yes, it has.
Do you recall when you retired how many people worked at the post office and how many routes we had or not?
We had 5 city routes and probably 6 or 7 rural routes.
Do you recall the population of Smyrna back when you first started? Was it around 7,500 then?
Somewhere along in that area, yeah.
And I believe we're knocking around 40,000 today?
40,000, a little over 40,000 today.
You mentioned working at the post office and the service stations. Was it any other places that the people worked here, or did they have to go out of town to work, do you recall?
Well, we had the aluminum place out on the base.
Better built.
Better built.
Yeah.
That was a big popular place for the people. Probably the biggest popular place. And of course, the local people years ago was Lane Cedar Company.
Lane Cedar Mill, I recall that.
Yes.
Yeah. Then you was also a member of the volunteer fire department. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Coon Hart was the chief when I got on in 56, and W.E. Carter was assistant chief. And then in 59, W.E. took over as chief, and Coon stepped down as chief. And W.E. was a outstanding man. We got our first big new truck in 59. It was a Chevrolet, complete pumper and all. And the first new truck it was bought in Smyrna was 1924 T model, was bought in Smyrna. And the first fire truck we had was Mr. Hager that run the cotton gin over here.
Johnny's daddy?
Yeah, okay. Took a Studebaker car and cut it down and put a wooden box on it. And when they get to a fire, they would jack the rear wheel up and they put a belt on it, and it had a pump on it, and it's what pumped the water.
You talking about that fire truck, about how many volunteer firemen did you have?
We had, we had about 20.
About 20? And if a fire happened while you was at work or at home, how were you notified about a fire?
They blew alarm.
Blew alarm. Do you recall where that fire station was?
It was right here where we're sitting.
Well, right here where we sitting.
Right here where we're sitting.
And then later on, you became involved with the city about being a member of the city council.
1981.
1981. How many members was on the city council then?
5.
5. And today we have
7 on the council.
7 on the council today. So 1981, and you're still on there today. How many years is that, Paul?
I started my 31st year in December.
Can you recall anybody serving any longer than you have?
Sam Ridley.
Sam Ridley served longer than that?
Yes,
Okay. Can you tell us of some changes that's happened in those 30-something years of being on the council?
Yeah, like I say, the fire department has been certainly a big change. We've gone full-time. Bill Cubberson's granddaddy was the first chief in Smyrna, and then his daddy was chief in Smyrna, and his daddy was a police and fire commissioner for the city of Smyrna. And now Bill Cubberson is our fire chief, and Bill is doing an outstanding job, and we have the best fire rating that you can get, and this helps us on our homeowners insurance.
Yes.
So that's good. And then also our police department has really improved over the years. Chief Jonah was our first major chief in Smyrna. He served during the day, and Bale Sellers served at night. They were 2, they walked. And then in 1959, we got our first police car, and they did an outstanding job.
Yes. So times have really changed, because I don't know how many policemen, do you have
We got close to 100 police officers
100
right
police
now.
officers
Yes.
a day? Yeah. Of course, the city has grown also.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Can you tell me some of the major things that you're most proud of during your time of city council, or else while you've been a citizen of Smyrna?
Yes, I consider the main thing that I accomplished as serving on the council. Our tax rate was set at 75 cents by Sam Ridley in 1947. And when I left office as mayor in 1997, it was down to 40 cents. And we left the council with $13 million in the coffers. And so that's the main thing I'm proud of. Another thing that I'm proud of, and you were there, and we were there together, is bringing Nissan to Smyrna.
Yes.
That was really a big thing for the city of Smyrna, and we had the opportunity to go to Japan and go through the Nissan plant, and that was really something to two old country boys that went to school at Old Jefferson that got the opportunity to go to Japan and be a part of bringing Nissan to Smyrna. And there was 2 farms involved with the Nissan plant. Mr. Mac McClary on Eland Springs Road, he was a ag teacher at the Smyrna High School at one time, and Mamie Cantrell. Mamie Cantrell had the farm on next to 41 out here, and her daddy was Jim Miller, and she inherited that farm from Jim Miller, and that's the 2 farms that Nissan is built on today.
Yes, and I believe Nissan just celebrated their 30th year being here in Smyrna.
Sure did, yeah.
That's a big plus. Do you recall about how many employees they have out there?
My understanding is somewhere around 6,000.
So that is something great. And when you first came to Smyrna, it was, you mentioned the cedar mill and Betterbilt, and we had quite a few probably rode the bus to Nashville to work.
Yeah.
We mentioned some major things that you're proud of. The Sam Ridley Parkway, wasn't there probably during your time when that happened?
Yeah, that was started in the 90s, and I got the money. The inside lane wasn't completed. It was just one lane. The outside lane was completed, and in 1998, we got the money from the state of Tennessee to complete the inside lane, and it was completed in 98.
98. Well, I don't know what we'd do today if we didn't have Sam Ridley Parkway, because our traffic situation is sometimes hard to get through the city of Smyrna. We mentioned some positive things that happened. Can you recall any major catastrophes that's happened in Smyrna during while you recall? I
would say probably one of the major catastrophes that we had in Smyrna, and that was the night I got married. That was in 1957, December the 27th. We had left to go on our honeymoon, and the next morning we called back to tell them everything was fine, and they told us about a wreck that happened here on the railroad track at the crossing. And my brother-in-law was sitting on the other side of the track waiting for the train to go through, and he told his wife, he said, "That car is not going to stop," and it didn't. They tried to beat the train, and 4 young people got killed that night. That was a catastrophe. And another catastrophe that happened that I remember was 2 local boys, Charlie Goins,
yes,
and Jack Daniels Warwick.
Yes.
Charlie killed Jack Daniel down behind where Bob Spivey's cold storage was, and put him on the railroad track. And Charlie thought he had a perfect crime, and guess what? The train derailed on the other side of Murfreesboro and didn't come through Smyrna that day, and Charlie got put in jail.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can recall, and you probably do too, I was in high school in the 60s, and we had a Smyrna Service Center where the donut shop is today downtown here on Murfreesboro Highway, and it burned up.
Right.
You recall when that burned up. So that was another thing that happened during that time.
Also, the Smyrna Service Center was a Ford dealership.
Yes.
At one time, and also next door where the snake pit is, it was a Ford dealership back in the 20s. Yeah.
Okay. Any other things that you can recall, the major changes in Smyrna that you can think
I guess
of?
one thing that really put Smyrna on the map was a railroad, and that was completed in 1951. And then the depot, the railroad bought the depot land, and that's what started Smyrna going. and the Tucker brothers owned that land, and they sold it to the railroad, and the railroad asked the Tucker brothers to name Smyrna. Well, they didn't, to name it.
Yeah.
And they were big church-going people. They were Presbyterian, and they come up with the name of Smyrna from Asia Minor in the Bible, and that's how Smyrna got its name.
Yeah. Another big plus that we had back in those days was Seward Air Base.
Right.
Yeah, we had Seward Air Base was a big plus for us.
Let me tell you about what I remember about the first thing about Seward Air Force Base. I wasn't but 4 or 5 years old, and Daddy kept talking about Seward Air Force Base coming, and Uncle Hubert had a farm down on the base, and one Sunday he carried me down there, and the first thing I saw was 2 bulldozers sitting out there beside his barn, and never been on a bulldozer myself. And Daddy said I jumped out of the truck and run down there and jumped up on one of them bulldozers. So that's the first thing I remember about Seward Air Force Base coming to Smyrna. And before then, 41 from Laverne to Smyrna wasn't completed. So Seward Air Force Base helped get 41 to Smyrna, and then in 55, the section from Smyrna to Murfreesboro was completed.
Right. Right. Well, Paul, I really enjoyed talking to you today, and you've done a tremendous job of telling us about some of the things. It's a story about Smyrna. Thanks.
I want to tell you one more thing.
Okay.
That we talk about people in Smyrna that we knew and that we grew up with and all. Where the first crossing store was over there, that was a coal yard at one time. And there was some platform scales that you could drive your truck up on and load the coal up, and you could tell how many tons of coal you had on your truck. And there was a man that run that, and you know who he was.
Who's that?
Tuck Beatty.
Oh, yes.
Tuck Beatty. You know, you see on TV about these men going to these gyms and lifting these weights all their life, and they had muscles. Tuck never went to a gym in his life, but he was born with muscles.
Yes.
That's just the way Tuck was. And he was an outstanding person.
Sure was. He and Skibo. I remember he and
Skibo was his brother.
Right.
Skibo was his brother. And another a person that had a lot to do with the history of Smyrna that people don't think about is Jeff Green. Jeff Green lived down on Monroe Street.
Yes.
Never had a car in his life, couldn't drive, but he always rode around Smyrna with a team of mules and a wagon. And that's another person that lived here.
Yeah, you mentioned those 3 families, and those 3 families still have people here living today, descendants of those people, and the fine citizens.
And I'll tell you another person that I had the pleasure of helping and the pleasure that I had of meeting was Elizabeth Beatty. She lived up on Patton Lane.
Yes.
I was lectioneering. I went up and knocked on the door and she invited me in, and I sat down and talked to her. I didn't know her. And I told her, I said, if I'm elected, if I can ever help you, you let me know and I'll be glad to do it. About 6 months later, she called me and said, Paul, I remember what you said, and I got a problem. And I said, okay. She said, I'd like for you to come pick me up. I want you to carry me somewhere, and I want to show you something. And I went and picked her up, and I carried her to, you know where Neil Oldham's barn is on Rock Spring Road?
Yes.
There's a graveyard there.
Yes.
And she carried me over there to that, and we got out and we walked around, and she said, this is where my husband was buried, and this is where this one was buried, and this is where this was buried. And she said, Paul, this graveyard's in a bad shape. Said, I wonder if you could get somebody to clean it up with the city. I said, I'll see what I can do. So I got Jack Wiley and the public service people to go over and clean it up. And after I got it cleaned up, I went and picked her up, and I carried her back over there. And she walked around Coon, and she cried, and she grabbed me and hugged me. And that's why I stay in the public service here in Smyrna, is things like that.
Where you can help people out.
That's exactly right.
You've done that for a long time, Paul, and we appreciate the job that you've done, and I appreciate you being with me here today on telling something about Smyrna. Thanks.
I appreciate the opportunity.